Welcome back, everybody, to the ND and Free podcast, brought to you by the ND and Free community. We are a worldwide community of NDers who are on a mission to free ourselves from the shame we feel, free from the burden of trying to fit in, and free from the burnout caused from not honouring our needs. Join us each week as we talk all things neurodivergence, including ADHD, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and more. From our one-to-one interviews on our ND Thrive Guide show to our flagship ND and Free Wellbeing show, we hope these conversations help fellow NDers across the world to honour their truth. Together, we can move towards a world where we can thrive in a way that best serves our neurotype and supports our nervous system. We are ND and Free. Okay, guys, we're back for a one-to-one interview on the Neurodivergent Thrive Guide show. We have Garrett Wood from Gnosis Therapy. Garrett offers solution-focused coaching, clinical hypnotherapy, and executive functioning support for high-achieving masking professionals. His coaching provides practical, evidence-based strategies rooted in the science of well-being. No burnout, no band-aids, because lasting success shouldn't cost your health, happiness, or relationships. I love that intro so much. It's fantastic. Welcome to the show, Garrett. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
No, absolutely no problem at all. I saw you on social media. I absolutely love your energy. It's so calm, but really clear in what you're saying. It's very authentic. And I handpick guests. So I just want to thank you so much for pulling me into your energy, which is great. I can't wait to talk about burnout here today. Such a big part of the neurodivergent experience. So we're going to look at what it is, how we can build a life around it, and honor our nervous system, which is a big thing for me. I'm obsessed with nervous system science, so I think we're going to have a great time. So just give us some context, if you will. So just for our audience, as far as working with neurodivergent people, what is your experience personally, people around you, and also the work that you're doing and why you like to work potentially with neurodivergent people?
Yeah, it's a kind of interesting because I opened my clinic in 2018, primarily focusing on helping people prevent, in theory, burnout, but also recover from it as well if they've already gone down that rabbit hole a little bit. And after about 6 months, when I looked back at my clientele and the people that were showing up, there was a rather large population that was presenting with ADHD. I don't do clinical diagnosis in my work, but half of the people that I'm talking about had a formal diagnosis and have always had one since they were, 18 or younger. And then the other half, they would share so many similar characteristics and traits, fears and frustrations, that the themes almost overlapped so much. But at the time, I had no awareness of what the different neurotypes and ADHD could actually look like. But it was through that process of seeing all of that I went and pursued some more education to help support my clients as well, but also went through my own diagnosis process because I realized, hey, there's a whole lot in common here. I may end up being more in common with my clients than I thought originally, which is pretty surprising to me.
Yeah, thank you. And you bring up a really important point, because of the increase of those discovering their truth. I don't like to say diagnosis, is increasing because that's a bit loaded at the moment, but discovering our truth is such a big thing. Yeah. So many therapists and coaches are going to have people walking through their doors, and being aware and informed and trained, whatever it may look like, is so important, I think, because the rate of people with exhaustion, burnout, chronic fatigue is very high in this community. So I think it's important, isn't it, for coaches and therapists to be informed by these things.
And it shows up a little bit different too, depending on your neurodevelopmental differences. And so sometimes if you're not aware that some of the things you suggest might actually be harmful for a lot of people. So it was a big shock and a big eye opener. And I always come from, being on the receiving end of a service before I've ever been a practitioner. So always been able to see how that benefits people, and it's been helpful myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what is your personal experience with burnout? I know this might be quite a big thing, but just give some context. Obviously, you're very passionate about working with people with this situation. So what was your experience? What led you to your own potential burnout, if that's what's happened?
Yeah, there's a Hunter S. Thompson quote where he talks about the person who knows where that line is the person who's crossed it one too many times. And I definitely know where that line is now. Well, the first time I burned out, it was a new position. I was promoted from being, there with my colleagues into a leadership position. So it was pretty isolating. And I was also isolated at home. And my normal way of relieving stress and tension was going for a run or lifting. But I'd had this hip pain all of a sudden that came from nowhere, it seemed, and it prevented me from being able to do some of those activities. So stressors would show up, and I wouldn't be able to displace that stress anyway. And there wouldn't feel like there was a lot of support at the time. And so that was my first round of burnout, is what precipitated that. But it showed up in a really interesting way because I didn't know it was burnout at the time. I was just like, my hip pain, my hip pain. If I could just get rid of this, everything would be fine. So I ended up at an ER on a Friday night, and the attending physician did it's like 9:30 at night, and he's doing a palpatory assessment of my groin, and he's like, "There's nothing wrong with you here. There's nothing here." And he was kind of like this accusatory look that maybe that was how I was enjoying my Friday night, was there, having his hands on my groin. But what it came to find out is it's just muscle tension that I couldn't ever displace because I was in such a state of stress and discomfort for so long that it started showing up in these musculoskeletal aches and pains. Displaced emotions, feelings of those isolation and worries and concerns about, can I do this new position? Can I do this new job? And so that kind of was what was all going on below the surface that I was unaware of at that first level of burnout.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I love the fact that you're talking about that muscle tension being sort of a comorbidity, really, of what's happening inside ourselves, inside our nervous system, inside our stress levels, our cortisol, whatever's happening inside. And just to briefly to echo that is that I was a massage therapist for 5 or 6 years. And obviously I was seeing the same people coming through those doors with lots of physical ailments and muscle tension and tight fascia as well, is that what covers your muscle groups. And they tell me their stories. They tell me what they're going through, and that's great. I'm like, this is a massage. You should probably just relax and enjoy. But they wanted to share. And the more they come back, you start to see that they were never going to release that tension, not through me pressing those muscles, because a few days later, with the stress that's happening in their life, they're locking, they're contracting, they're leaning forward. And it's getting them to tap into all different ways of meeting life so they can open up their posture and tend to their nervous system, have more parasympathetic in their life, more joy. And I really started to see that their physical symptoms started to ease. So it's interesting, isn't it? I just want to echo that. It's quite a powerful connection.
It's amazing seeing the body mind and where one begins and one leaves off. We think of them as separate things, but so often they very rarely are. It's so interesting to be able to see that from the body worker's perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. God, got nostalgia now from those times. But yeah. Thank you so much. So let's dive into today's episode. Let's cover as much as we can because, like I said, Garrett, this is such a big thing. It's kind of heartbreaking, to be honest, how much burnout there is in our community, and we're all trying to help each other through it and know how best to honor our needs, honor our truth, honor what our nervous system needs. So this could be really, really powerful for the audience. So thank you. So let's start with what burnout is, because you were saying, you wouldn't know it was burnout with the way it was presenting itself. So I know it's probably quite broad, but in your experience, what is burnout and what can it kind of look like for people?
Yeah, the formal definition, by the World Health Organization is it's a workplace phenomenon, that it's something that shows up when we have to work. But with the way our lives are now, we spend more time at work or thinking about work than most of us do almost any other endeavor we do. And if you work for yourself or you're in leadership position or you're passionate about what you do, you typically put in more hours than most people, not even because you're expected to or because you're even compensated for it, but that piece dribbles over from that professional boundaries to our personal lives. And so I do think that definition is a little bit limited because it does show up as cynicism, it shows up as exhaustion, and it shows up as irritation as well. That's not just about work projects and frustrations in the office. It's almost every part of our lives.
It sure is. And I think, talking about hyperfocus in the neurodivergent community, when we are very passionate about something, which is incredible, we can really hyperfocus on that, but it's very hard to catch what is our capacity, what is our window of tolerance for that, how quickly will we get overstimulated, our nervous system kick in and start releasing stress hormone because we haven't got enough dopamine to engage and push ourselves forward. So we are more prone to that, but knowing what our capacity is sometimes is the hardest part when it feels a bit chaotic, perhaps, with our brain and nervous system. So do you find that obviously people's capacity will be different, but also maybe depending on what it is as well?
Yeah, depending on how far they are in that process too, their capacity is a little bit different. If we're in that stage 1, there's a lot of opportunities to make adjustments and changes pretty directly, pretty practically. If someone's in that stage 5 and they've been in that burnout for a sustained period, it's almost become a part of who they are, how they show up and relate to the world. Like it's just how it is now. And that is even more challenging to kind of break that cycle. Because once you've been going for so long, that recovery time is a lot longer to get back to neutral. And it's not necessarily measured in time and duration. It's more measured in how much support you're actually able to receive from your environment to be able to give your body what it needs to be okay. And if you're neurodivergent, you're going to need more supports than the world's designed for. And so you have to be really intentional about finding out what you need to be able to make that difference for yourself. Because if you're not, I don't know many other people that are going to, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's so true. And I do think, we we're talking about this on the previous episode, we we're talking about using this sense of self-awareness, but it's more than just, oh, I've noticed I did that. But much more than that. It's a knowing about the limits of different parts of the way your brain functions, how long you can spend with people, how long you can engage in a certain activity before your nervous system starts to get a little bit ramped up. That is all self-awareness and tapping into understanding how you experience life in any given moment. So it can be a bit tricky, like I said, about the kind of chaos that can take place when you're not able to see all these things happening, and you can fall into big, deep lengths of exhaustion. So my point of this, going off on the tangent, is what do you feel is the difference between heavy levels of exhaustion, for example, and the word burnout in inverted commas? How are we telling the difference? Is, like you said, is it duration of how long we're struggling for? Can it be fleeting but still be called burnout? I'm just trying to get around that sort of the political usage of it all.
Yeah. And so there are different like colloquial senses of the word burnout where people are like, oh, I'm just so burned out from this task. And sometimes in any project, there's a tedious portion of that project. And sometimes, you might put that off for a while. And then that tedious portion grows. And then you're like, man, I just can't do this part of this thing. I'm so burned out from doing that. And I hear that a lot. People are talking about that. But this is a little bit different than that. This is on a physiological level. It's showing up in the way that you're filtering out the world naturally. It's much easier to see all of the negatives and much more challenging to see all the positives. So if we were to ask you, what are some positive experiences and emotions that you felt through your last week? And if you didn't have a lot, if you had 3 or less that you could name, that would be really indicative of something more than just, I'm tired of doing this task and I haven't been able to rest for a while. It would be indicative of something more sinister going on the bottom and a little bit more habitual. And so that's kind of what I think is the biggest difference.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. The more sort of holistic nature of it all, it affects you on, like we said already, on multiple levels, and that's how you're able to pick up on it a little bit. Because I know personally, I can get really overstimulated in my mind, but my body feels okay. If I actually tap into my body feels okay at the moment. But I notice that if I push and force more so, I then really start to notice it in my body. I feel like this fizzing going on in my body, this sort of a sense of tension, but also I start talking much faster. I can feel that I'm sort of ramping up. And being able to catch that and knowing exactly the things I need to do, the tools I need to use, or the environment I need to be in to help me ground, essentially, just keep regrounded, because I feel like I leave my body. My body gets really overstimulated and I naturally would leave my body. It's uncomfortable. How can I root back in a sensory informed way? Yeah. And then even though that's kind of a more positive loop, because it's going to happen again, probably. You catch it, you reground, you catch it, you reground, to potentially avoid it being stuck, I suppose, for a long period of time. So my question would be in the sense of ease. You're talking about things. There's things that we have to do, which may take more of a toll than the things that come with ease. The things that we enjoy, the things that make us feel parasympathetic and joyful, are going to be much easier to engage in for longer. I certainly know there's things that I have to do take a much bigger toll. I find it much harder with lower dopamine to force myself to do those things using adrenaline and cortisol and stress hormone to get the job done. I last nowhere near as long and could risk a burnout potentially. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I love what you said about the grounding yourself in it, the virtuous cycle of that, where sometimes the evidence of like, oh, okay, I'm grounding myself again, sometimes can be filtered to like, oh, here I am again. And what's really interesting is you're like, oh no, here I am again, recognizing that I needed to ground myself and knowing how to do that. And the more time I'm able to do that, the more time I spend in that window of tolerance in that parasympathetic state, the easier it is to have that experience moving forward. the more likely it is to occur over time. And so I really enjoyed your perspective on that, where you're like, here I am again. Okay, grounding again. Excellent. Almost as a positive example of the efforts and like the willingness to be present with yourself through that process. And that piece is really challenging, I think, for a lot of people to get to if they haven't had that experience before. And they've only been able to do something from that adrenaline piece, that effortful nose to the grindstone, white knuckling it. But once you've had a different experience, you can have a lot more of those different experiences. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think, especially from a neurodivergent perspective, is that we can tend to, we're kind of like waving a little bit. We're waving a potential, being hyper focused and not being able to catch when we need to stop, and then waving back to, oh God, I'm so tired, I just need to take the day, and going back and forth. And it's so easy to identify as that, as being something that you're really struggling, life's really hard, not again, what can I do? And then this is all what they would call second darts. You bring all this language in, you're second darting it. You've got the actual experience that you're having, which can be fleeting, but then we meet it obviously with all of this language, which I'm sure is another part that would lead us down that track to burnout as well, because we feel like in our brain, we need to do more. It's pathetic. Why can't, I'm a 42-year-old man, and I can't even do this. I have to do it. It's, we have this belief that we need to keep pushing. I know in some of the other trailers I've watched with you, you talk about this really well, about this. We think we need to do more to become a healthy human being and a capable human being and a successful human being, which I know is big for your kind of work. So yeah, I'd like to pass that back to you, because I love how you talk about it. This kind of, to succeed, we need to work really hard to get there. And I think we all know where that generally will lead us.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do think that hard work gets rewarded, and they're not wrong, right? It does take time to build mastery. It does take reps to get good at something. But there's a difference to doing it out of duress and doing it out of like excitement, enthusiasm, interest, and pleasure. We can learn in any environment. We might be learning that it's a really hard thing to do. We might be learning that it's a really enjoyable thing to do. The actual tasks themselves feel very different when you're going through them. What I think surprises people, though, is not necessarily sacrificing to do more. It's that even when they're feeling pleasure while they're doing the activity, that can still lead to burnout. There are people that talk about passion being adaptive or maladaptive, where we're going from, yes, this is exciting, this is engaging, I love it. But there's limits to that, because if we turn that into an obsession, or you put all of your identity in that outcome, now if you have a bad day, if you need a day off, if you need a day away, or you hit a challenge that you're trying to figure out, it's very easy to go into that, oh no, I must be a no good, very bad, terrible person. And we want to avoid that feeling. That's not a good feeling. And so it's much easier to dig in and double down. And that's when people really start putting themselves in the way of burnout, in the way that they're coping with those little fears and frustrations as they show up. Instead of addressing them directly, they try to outwork them. And that's where we kind of get entrenched and like caught in this, what becomes a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think, our next question was all about seeing the signs coming. So we've segued really nicely into that. Is that how can we see, let's ignore what is exhaustion, what's burnout in the moment. It's just picking up on, I think everybody kind of knows what generally their body and mind will end up doing as we start to really, we're just basically overdoing it. So I work night shifts, for example, which isn't very good for an ADHD brain. So I have to put things in place to manage that. And I know what signs to look for when I've had a really bad sleep. That day needs to be addressed probably and needs to look a little bit different. And if anything, I need to really input sensory tools, positive sensory input into my body to tell it it's okay, essentially, because it's like, why the hell are you not sleeping? What are you doing? So it's kind of meeting it in that way. So it's being able to see the signs. But speaking of signs, I guess it's going to look differently for everybody. But what would you say that there's no probably key signs, but let's just start there. What's the most common things you may see with your clients? What are they sort of talking about when you feel like they know it's coming?
If they've been through burnout before, which most of my clients have, because if you've gone through it once, you're more than likely to go through it again. And if you've gone through it twice, you're even more likely to be going through it eventually in your future, because it is this idea of what are the signs coming, and a lot of people are very successful and they're able to kind of ignore some of those things and push through. And oftentimes, if you're in a flow state, that happens naturally as a result of being in that state. But like you mentioned, sometimes your lifestyle design puts you in the way of being more vulnerable than it would be otherwise, with sleep being off of whatever your biological clock would be. When people have that experience, they know that they need support, but they're not always certain what's the best support for them because we don't know ourselves that well. And there's not a lot of people out there yet talking about all the subtle nuances that can show up and predict everyone's different way of being in this world. But there are kind of clues. So there's a little bit of, clues out there. And so part of the process that we do at the work is this assessment process. And I love that you mentioned sensory, because that's one of the key components, is this sensory intelligence piece. If we know if you're sensory seeking, like more is better, and you have a low threshold, you're going to be middle sense are going to feel good. But if you're sensory avoiding and you're in an environment that's really sensory stimulating, the amount of effort it's going to take for you to be able to get through your day is going to be unbearable. Your executive functioning strengths, whatever they are going to be greatly diminished. And it's not something we can outwork with effort, but it is something that we're not even necessarily acutely aware of, how impactful it really is. My favorite example is this marshmallow study they did with 4-year-olds, where they gave them a marshmallow and they said, hey, if you don't eat this marshmallow when I come back, I'll give you 2. And the kids that said, okay, got it, and they got the second marshmallow, they followed up with them. Wildly successful academic careers, healthy relationships. The kids that didn't say no, that were like, marshmallow, yum, they followed up with those kids and they were not as successful academically. They followed up eventually with the kids that weren't as academically successful, and they put them through some kind of assessments, and they found out most of them had different sensory needs than the environment that they were tested in. That the environment they were doing that test in was so challenging for them that to be able to use all of those executive functioning skills to say no in that moment, to delay gratification, they couldn't access. And the hard part about that story is the environment that they challenged those kids in was a classroom setting. And so that's the setting that these kids were spending most of their life in. And so if we look at their academic success, the conclusion used to be, oh, if you have grit, if you have determination, if you have this top-down skill or strength, you're a good person. And that's at 4 years old. But the real story is, if you're in an environment that's not aligned with what your sensory needs, it doesn't matter what your grits or your willpower or your executive functioning strengths are, you're not going to be able to use them. And it's that impactful. And most people aren't aware of what their needs are. And so it's really challenging, because most environments, you're not happy or you're not lucky enough to walk into something that just naturally matches what you need.
Yeah, I love that. I remember hearing that on one of your other shows as well. And I think the environment is such a key element. We think that we should just be adaptable and be able to adjust and, within reason to any environment that we're in. And obviously, ND or otherwise, that clearly isn't true. We thrive in different environments depending on our sensory profile or our neurotype or whatever it may be. But it's interesting, because in the community we talk a lot about, if we're already having issues with executive function, when you really don't have any, it's a pretty clear indicator that something's going on. You can't even do anything at all. And I think we were talking about the crossover between depression and burnout, with this kind of lack of motivation and inability to want to engage in anything. You don't have even the energy to do the things that you love, which is really heartbreaking. We live by our values. We follow our values. We do what's important to us. Yeah. But we don't even have the energy, the capacity, the urge, whatever it may be, to engage. So a lot of us may think, God, am I depressed? But so much of it can literally be, we have literally burnt the candle to nothing, and we have nothing left to give, even the most joyful things. So what are your thoughts there about this sort of crossover between lethargy, not having the energy, and not wanting to engage?
Yeah, the main component of burnout is that cynicism. So if you're in that stage 5 where you are feeling that physical exhaustion to the point where you can't get excited about even things that normally excite you, your guitar's sitting there collecting dust, and you're like, oh, you're listening to a song on the radio and you're like, man, I know I could play that song. I want to learn how to play that song. And you still find yourself not picking up that guitar, even in something that's as fun, interesting, and naturally engaging. That's indicative of burnout. It could also be indicative of depression. Depression is often defined as losing joy in the day-to-day living of life, of normal pleasures, and a rapid change in that. So at a certain point, I don't know if there's an actual difference there. If we've been in burnout for so long and we have the belief that no matter what we do, we're not going to be able to get out of it, and you have a lot of evidence to suggest that that might be true. Good reasons. So if we're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, we're like, well, let's challenge that belief. Is that always true? If it's been true for a long time, it's a really challenging exercise to take yourself through. One, emotionally, you're in that state. Two, you have collected enough evidence that that cynicism feels rational and reasonable. And so doing that work is sometimes almost the wrong way around. Like you were talking about with your clients, you're working on their body. That tension that you're helping them release back when you were doing the massage wasn't going to be enough. They had to have a different approach to their life. And then they would need your services less often as the therapist in that position. And with that depression, it's challenging that way to know the difference between the two, because I don't know if there really is at a certain point.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think maybe a sense of low tone, I suppose,
Yeah.
is the kind of language I kind of like to use. And to be honest, it's sometimes it can be clearer than we think. You know, if we converse for too long, a lot of us NDers experience this thing. I have it too, where Garrett, you know, I like to send voice messages. I find it hard to type long messages. It's probably dyslexia, but undiagnosed. But if I do too many messages in a row, I'm just not making any sense. I'm sort of rambling on, not being that clear, and then I'll get frustrated with myself because I'm a good talker. And it's so obvious at that point that I just need to stop. I need to turn the lights off. I need no sensory audio coming in, and just getting my body back on track, because my brain can no longer deliver the words that I want to say, and it's very frustrating. And for me, that's a key sign. So I guess for NDers, it might even be clearer because we know how we may have struggles, and they look even worse now, which is a big sign.
Yeah. And I think that too is like, wait, hold on. I'm normally good at this. This is one of my strengths. I enjoy this. What's happening? That's a good sign that you're misaligned with what your nervous system needs, the supports it needs to be able to continue performing. And it doesn't matter if the task's done or not. The task at that point shifts from whatever that thing is to whatever you need to eventually be able to get back to that task. And I think understanding that anything you ever accomplish is done through your well-being, not at its expense, is a really important frame for people to have access to. And that's true for everybody, but that's absolutely like almost a non-negotiable for people with neurodevelopmental differences. Because it's already so strained by day-to-day interactions and environments that you're already operating in a deficit because of the environments you're in that aren't aligned with necessarily your needs. And so you're already working harder than most people to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's totally true. And, you know, the little bit in our mission statement is, you know, working to be free of burnout by honoring our needs. You know, it's all about needs in this community. What are our needs on all levels? Because once we figure out what those things are, we may be able to put them in place ahead of time. And our next question was all about, you know, how can we put things in place to increase capacity as well? Because we're wanting to rebuild capacity. In the long term, you get late diagnosis and you've gone this whole time pushing and forcing and masking. And now we're trying to discover who we truly are. And included in that is knowing how to take care of ourselves for the first time with the information we've been provided, which is incredible. But it's knowing what our capacity is and then rebuilding, because there's a lot of talk, Garrett, in our community, especially in ND and Free, about the power of neuroplasticity. So the ability to retrain our brain, to strengthen our nervous system, so it becomes a more of a default. So we're not saying neuroplasticity to retrain your brain so you're no longer ADHD, but allowing neural pathways to do some of the heavy lifting by naturally firing in a way that's helpful. But to do that, we need to keep training it through our behavior, being in the right environments, all the things that you're talking about there. So would you say a big part of this capacity work isn't about how can I cope now? It's more about how can I empower myself to have more capacity?
Yes, absolutely. This idea of coping is something that's like a general intervention. And what you and I are talking about is something that's much more specific and individualized, right? If someone's feeling stressed, maybe it's easy to scroll on social media and disassociate. Maybe it's easy to go reach for an external substance that calms your nervous system down one way or another. But that's a very general intervention. It's not really addressing your own unique reasons why that stressor is showing up or why that stress response is easier to feel and harder to let go of. if we can get into the nitty gritty with it, we can know a little bit more about why that shows up for you. And then we can accommodate it. And so instead of coping, with these outside things that have a point of diminishing returns, usually there's only so much that they help before they start causing harm. Maybe we don't even need those substances at all. And in fact, the more specific our intervention is, the more practical, the more aligned it is with what your needs are. Eventually, you would hope to see that those coping strategies would greatly diminish, even without having to make that an intentional effort. You just wouldn't need them, so you wouldn't reach for it as often.
Yeah, you kind of want it to come slightly naturally too. If I've learned anything on this journey, people I'm speaking to is just being able to establish behaviors that come with a sense of ease, and maybe you need to attach them to other behaviors. We're not going to go into all that today. We talk about that lots already, but it can be pretty hard, Garrett, for NDers to create behaviors that are going to stick, right? We'll do it for a bit and then we're on to the next thing, which is fine.
Yeah.
But it's how you're meeting that, your relationship with it, your judgment or non-judgment over the things that you're doing. But what would you say the part of values and what's important to us can play into us avoiding burnout, coming out the other side and rebuilding, is knowing what's important, what our values are, leaning into those things, but knowing when it's okay to do something that's completely unrelated to all of that, that is just fun and silly as well, and making sure that our parasympathetic system can help us kind of work with the stress hormone that may be in our system, kind of using those two together to kind of befriend each other. So I'm rambling a bit, but so yeah, essentially, how can we connect to these things that are important to us and to our values, but also know when it's important to do things that may not be that important to us, that are really fun and maybe silly and playful, as a way of using our parasympathetic to help us get out of this funk, out of this situation. Because I feel like if I just do ending free forever when I'm struggling, it will give me this sense of dopamine and I'll feel connected. But sometimes I do need to watch a film or be silly with my stepson or chase my cat around the house, and it brings this joy and this parasympathetic sensations that come up that tell my body I'm okay, everything is okay. We're trying to tell our body you are safe here and everything is going to be okay. And we need to take action to do that. It's not easy, but we unfortunately do need to take action. It's part of the journey, isn't it?
The values there, living your values, the purpose, right? Meaning is a big deal. But sometimes that can raise the stakes so high to where it feels like unsafe to take action, or to take a rest, because this work is so great. There's so many people to reach. There's so much change to make. How dare I take a moment to chase my cat around and just be present? That comes back to some of those beliefs about our value, right? And understanding kind of our role. And I do think a big cultural myth that most people have is that success or outcomes come from effort. And that if you're not putting effort down and being serious and that you're not actually going to make progress. And people often talk about like your comfort zone versus the growth zone. And through there, they're like, oh, we got to get out of your comfort zone to get you to that growth zone. And I always think about that if you're like a trapeze artist and you're like on that pedestal at the top and you have to get from this side to the next. And those people all have a safety net. So if something happens, not only are they trained to know what to do, not only do they have the strength and the skill and they've developed it elsewhere, that if the worst case scenario happens and they fall, there's something there to catch them and they can get right back up, unharmed, unfazed, and begin again. And so I think sometimes we miss this idea of effort actually requires like a sense of safety, a sense of support. And if we have it, we can take really big risks and we can go really hard and still recover because we have that safety net below us. And maybe it's playing with the cat and getting silly with your stepson and go watching a film and coming back and feeling renewed and refreshed, because that playfulness is a really powerful generative thing. Some of the greatest works that we've ever experienced from art and even innovation comes from like an excitement and enthusiasm and interest and playfulness. And the mistakes that people make, they think they're working on something else, falls apart miserably, and they're like, oh, I feel like that was a lot of wasted effort. Well, is there something we're salvaging here? And that thing ends up being the thing, right? Like in Silicon Valley, they always talk about, oh, we pivoted and we thought this little product was just a throwaway, and it ended up being the thing that, went wild and, became a ubiquitous app that we're all using now. So I do think that awareness of the value of play is a cultural myth that we're still working on trying to develop the ethos of.
No, I think you're right. It's like, how dare I, how dare I have rest, or how dare I'm not going to get anywhere if I go and hang out with my friends or go and play a game of tennis or something. Also, we know the benefit, the fitness aspect, but we feel like we shouldn't be doing that. We're not worthy of doing that, especially if you're neurodivergent. You're trying to build a business and you're trying to get out of work that maybe doesn't best serve you and doesn't honor your needs. So you're building something and you feel like if you
Yeah.
don't build it in every second of the day, you're not going to be able to do that. But imagine, burn yourself out throughout the day and then turn up on a video looking exhausted in your eyes. You could tell they're not present and they're just slurring their words. People aren't going to connect to that. They're not going to tap into your business and what you're doing. So it's kind of trying to show up as your best self, I suppose. But having said that, a really, really important message, I think, for people that are listening, Garrett, I think is a huge one, is that it can be very difficult, especially when you have a family, especially if you're a single mum or a single dad, that there just isn't time to, outside of the family unit and housework and all the other stuff, to tend to the things that we've discussed here today. But like we often say in the coaching I've done over the years, is there's always a minute, there's always a 2 minute or a 3 minute where we can use that in such a powerful way, just that 1 minute. So for me, if I can't lie down for half an hour, which I tend to do a couple of times a day, not to sleep, just to not have all this input. Sometimes I'll do it for 1 minute and I'll start yawning and rub my head, which means my body saying thank you. And I'm back in my body. 1 minute. So other than that piece of advice, which is there's always 1 minute to do something, what would you say? How can we help ourselves in a life which is full? And it kind of has to be full because of family, how we can meet it in a way that's helpful. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Having a family and then recognizing a 9 to 5 maybe is not helpful for you. So trying to figure out a way through that by working on something that in the future might be more helpful for you is a really big challenge. And I think honoring the idea and like the value of that for your life and understanding that it's not something that just everybody can do. There's lots of people out there that had opportunities to go out and start their own thing and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to cope instead of figuring out what I actually need, however that ends up looking in their life. I remember when I first left my corporate job and opened business for myself, I didn't announce it on LinkedIn because I knew my fathers are on LinkedIn. And both of them are pretty big business guys. And every time we got together, our ability to talk was about business. And so it was really fun for us to be able to do that. It's the easiest way for me to relate to them. And they both, when I did finally change and update it, open my own clinic and made the announcement, they both reached out the same day within like an hour of each other. And we're like, oh, that's so great. I'm so excited for you. And then they both shared a very similar story, which is I had an offer once when I was about your age and I had kids at home. So I said, no, I got to do the safe thing. I got to do what's right for my family. And they still to this day wonder what would have happened had they taken that offer. And they've seen successful people that have said yes to that, and they've seen not so successful people. So who knows, right? But the idea in that moment isn't necessarily, should I or should I not do this? It's what would I need to feel safe enough to try and see what happens. And sometimes you can get those needs met through your endeavor that you're helping build for yourself, if it's aligned with what you actually need. So it could make it easier to cope because you're doing something that's helpful instead of something that's harmful to you, to be able to get through that 9 to 5 while you're working on it. But in the meantime, we have to care for yourself as you're in that process, because it's not a short road. It's a long endeavor. And so if we're holding out on that dopamine until you're finally successful and we're berating ourselves every day until we arrive, we're never going to arrive, because we're going to way run out of steam long before we do if we have that approach. So what do we need between now and then? Every day, every week, every month. And it's different for everybody. Like you said, for you, it's that sensory, like moving back, pulling away from it. For others, it might actually be leaning into more sensory stuff. Maybe they need to put on loud music and go outside and feel the sun and do some jumping jacks or whatever, get their heart full, whatever it is to get them back in that parasympathetic state. It looks different for a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a nice cheesy analogy that we use a few times is that when your body is feeling a certain sensation, maybe an uncomfortable one, it's kind of like a phone call. And the question is, are you going to answer the phone? Or are you either going to turn it off or just let it ring? Our body is sending us messages at all times. And a lot of that can be informed by past traumas, obviously neurodivergence, things that we've been through, that they're all signals, all sort of physical pain, internal stuff is a signal that maybe there's something we can tend to. And it's being able to listen needs you to be present and embodied. And obviously, I'm sure a big part of burnout is it can compound on itself because you're not addressing or being in your body to spot other issues that are happening. And then kind of losing track of where it all began, really. And then trying to conceptually figure it out when all we really have is this moment, right? We only have this moment to tend to whatever is presenting in our experience, even from a mindfulness perspective as well, is how can we tend to that? And I guess, would you say that our journey to building capacity to, I guess, avoiding burnout in the future is always listening in and knowing how to tend? And once you've got to that place, know how to tend to your plant that is you, you can have a chance at flowing rather than going down into the depths and coming back up for a Hail Mary and then down into the depths, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that flow, that piece of being able to get it, not necessarily the hyper-focused flow, right? But that consistent highs and lows that aren't so overwhelming that the whole world feels like it's coming down around you is a very enjoyable experience to live a life with. It's, it's going to be ebbs and flows depending on the stressors going on in your life. But as long as you're attuning to your stress response and helping your body trigger that relaxation response, it makes it much easier to kind of navigate those rough waters at times in life. Even if those stressors don't change in that moment, if you're taking action on them in the long run, they will. But in the meantime, we still have to care for our stress response and attune to it.
Yeah, thank you. And for anybody listening, in our next, I think in an episode or two, we are doing flow versus hyperfocus with a person that's done science-backed papers on the difference. So guys, tune in for that. But come back to today is, as we wrap all this up and bundle it all up into a nice little package, people can go away and they're done and they're good to go. I just think, we talked about this tending, but I think understanding our sensory profile being one of those things, but just we really do need to start to tap in and understand what we truly need. We talk about honoring your needs, but what does that mean? And I think a lot of it is answering that call. And I think everything that we talked about today sort of alludes to how you may be able to work towards that. So as we talk about all these things and they all come together as one key thing, what would you say is a life that is burnout free? What does it look like, Garrett? Tell us what does, not specifically, but what does life look like when we are in flow, when we are doing what we enjoy, but we know how to rest and we know what we need? What do you think that kind of looks like? Is it deep self-awareness and self-compassion? Is it intellectual? Is it conceptual? What do you think it looks like?
I think it's all of those things. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's more easily thought of as an experience, almost like a feeling or a sensation, a way of relating to the world even, where it doesn't feel so dire. It doesn't feel like the stakes are so high, that you can access that playful joy, and you can also access effort, and you can enjoy and relax and give yourself permission to choose to relax and to be able to actually absorb and feel that as something that's valuable just because you're valuable and it's something that you need. And your needs matter. And if you don't know that conceptually, like, yeah, my needs matter and I got to care for myself. But there's a difference between that knowing that that's true and then feeling that that is true. And I do think that once you have access to that feeling, it makes it much easier to say yes and to say no and honor those needs when they show up without, the alarm bells having to go off to get your attention in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. And as I was stumbling trying to figure out what I was trying to say, it's come back to me now, which is that we matter and we are of value and we are worthy. I think these are really nice words to connect to ourselves. So rather than, I know I have to do this, it's important to keep myself in check. Seems a bit colder, doesn't it? But knowing that I'm worth is, I'm allowed to play. I'm worthy of play. It's okay. I matter. It's important to me to have fun and not just grind out and be inspiring because I'm so hardworking. Check me out. Whoa, he sacrificed everything to get where he is today. Now he has the dream life. It's like that's That is a YouTube video right there, guys, with pumping music in the background. But really, when it comes down to it, it's those beautiful finite moments. To be super cheesy here, is those beautiful little moments with a partner, or that hilarious time with your child, at that time they hug you and say, "I love you." These are all the things that fill us up and allow us to come off some sort of beautiful energy that's in us. And I think it's so hard for the grind to wear us down, and we are functioning off stress hormone, which we talk a lot about on the show. And there's no peace there. You're not going to find peace there. You're not going to find peace in the Hail Mary moment when you get an award or whatever it may be. It's the reward is those special moments, I think. And I think that's a nice, lovely little way to wrap up everything we said today. So what are your thoughts there about sort of tapping into our worthiness, and that we do matter, and we are allowed to take care of ourselves?
Yeah, and it's important. Yeah. I think having self-compassion is, I've seen a lot of people with neurodivergence across everything where they're able to have compassion for other people because they know how it feels to suffer inside. And so they're able to look at other people and often give them the benefit of the doubt, even when their performance doesn't show up the way they would hope or expect in that moment. And they're like, yeah, well, they're a human, and it's hard. And I know it's hard because I have my own struggles. But it's one thing to then say that same thing about themselves. There seems to be an extra level of challenge there to be able to turn that compassion into self-compassion, where you can say that same thing about yourself. Something I've seen helpful for people is if they have an image of a younger version of themselves, somewhere where they're more innocent, and we kind of give children the benefit of the doubt, like we do animals and small children. And something about looking at that image of yourself, and giving them the benefit of the doubt and offering that self-compassion somehow sneaks past some of those hardwired things that we have set up over those years. Yeah.
It certainly does. And, we talk about a lot is that we have these micro moments when we were a kid in school, when you're at your ND and people are kind of making comments about you. We have built up a belief, a neural pathway based off what we've been told, about us struggling with things, not being able to do stuff. So there is some unwiring to do on this journey as well. But let's not go down that road in this moment. That's a whole other conversation. But I just think when it comes to neurodivergence, is how I see it, is our body essentially will be running wild a little bit. Our brain will be too. And a lot of the work is just regulation. We spend a lot of our energy and time having to re-regulate our systems, and they need us. So I like to think of yourself as the witnessing self. You're the compassionate witness. So you're witnessing your nervous system, you're witnessing your thoughts mindfully. And being there for it is you're tending to yourself. So my nervous system is something that I want to take care of. It's part of me, but I'm looking at it. It's not consuming my experience. I'm looking at it and saying, hey, I've got you. And that seems to be quite a good hack for a lot of people, is that if they see part of their experience as something they can befriend and witness, that seems to help, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And recognizing I'm caring for this. And that's,
Yeah. And I hope this language is just really helpful for the listeners. We can't tell them exactly what they need to do, but this sort of language and way of thinking about it can be really, really useful. So I really, really hope everybody listening, this has been of help to you today. But Garrett, we always finish the show with 2 key questions, if you wouldn't mind having a go at them yourself. We've been doing this for at least a year. But there's one thing I want to ask you before I ask you those 2 questions, because it's really important. I saw it today on your social media, and I love it. Can you tell us quickly or briefly about the framework for sustainable success? Is it the A3 framework? Is that right?
Yeah, that is. And to your point, there's so many things that can be helpful for people. It can be kind of overwhelming. So to get down from really generalities into specifics, that first part of that framework is kind of an assessment process, which sounds scary, but really it's just a self-assessment. Hey, when do I perform my best? And so we kind of take people through 7 different layers of that. And some of the things we've talked about today: executive functioning, values, beliefs, automatic beliefs that they have about themselves, the emotions that they experience most consistently, the ones that are easy for them to experience. Maybe playful hasn't come up for them for a while. But then also we talk about their sensory profile. And so we kind of do 7 different big buckets to try to make sure we have a broad scope of what they need to help support themselves. And then we look at that second framework, which is accommodate. We go, okay, if this is what your nervous system needs, how can we easy and effortlessly, consistently provide it with this? What does that look like? And it's different for everybody because everyone's needs are different. And then from there, once we're in that regulated state, we have those supports, we have a little bit more capacity to now to begin to think bigger picture. How can we align work that is actually aligned with how we do our best work or how we work best, instead of usually the other way around, which is, okay, here's this work I have to do. Okay, what's everything I can possibly do to get through it? And that's a very different approach.
Yeah, thank you. The word alignment I love it. You said it quite a few times and I love it, what we aligned with. So that's really great. I just wanted to honor that because I think what you're doing there is fantastic. But that's from me because I love things like that, where it's broken down, there's tears and there's different parts of who you are. And I love all that, like a real deep dive, a mapping, if you will, as well.
Yeah.
I just love that sort of stuff. So hopefully people at home may feel the same. So yeah, thank you. I'll put links to your website and everything in the show notes because that sounds fantastic. But yeah, just to wrap up like we do everyone, the first question is, can you think of a key moment or an achievement that you're most proud of? In this case, it's to do with despite being neurodivergent and not knowing, or even in this case, being burnt out and not knowing. So I'm not talking about stuff that you've forced yourself to do. I can't believe that one was burnout because it probably caused the burnout. But can you think of something that you're just proud of and you're going through a rough time? You're like, wow, it was so incredible that I did that, not knowing I was struggling, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. There's been so many struggles in my life and so many frustrated moments. And it sounds similar to your journey where it's like, oh, okay, is this my issue? Is this a societal issue? What part of my issue is this? Is this like a trauma response to something? Is this a traumatic experience that I have, adverse childhood experiences? Is this something that is something else going on? Is this some subconscious beliefs that are holding me back? Or am I actually just a different type of person than what the default expectation is for most people? This script that we're expected to fit that has never quite felt like it's fit. And so when I look back at anything, moments where I've had pleasure and joy, doing something silly, where things have just worked out, it's always been luck is what I thought, or preparation. I was a Boy Scout growing up, so they always talk about being prepared. But this idea of it feeling like it just happened and it was this little moment of joy, there's been so many of those synchronicities that have shown up in my life. And now that I look back, I'm like, oh, that's probably actually any of those moments where it just felt like that was more because I was actually in tune and aligned with what my nervous system needs are and what my neurotype is. And it just felt different. And so it's that kind of thing that I think, those synchronicities, that really make the biggest difference. And so my favorite one is I was at an event similar, doing body work. I was teaching and there was a woman there and I'm making a joke, and that joke and her being stood over by people she was being demonstrated on, and then pressure on her shoulder was enough to trigger an experience that she had. And that experience was a challenging one and a traumatic one for her. But that pressure, that sensory input that she had in her system, and us standing over and then us joking, was enough to bring that memory to story, and then for her to feel safe enough with us to realize that she didn't have to have that protection in her body anymore. And so she had a little bit of an emotional release, and then she moved her shoulder and she's like, oh my gosh, my shoulder pain's gone. It's been there for 10 years. I've had every treatment possible. And here we are just doing a demo and making jokes and being around each other, enough to bring up that story that it was able to reset and unwind this entire pattern in a matter of moments. And there was something that was kind of special about that because we all witnessed it, but her feeling safe and that piece and us being there to help support her is what made a difference for her. And I think that is something that was really fun to witness.
It's an amazing story. And like you said, things being allowed to come up, feeling safe enough for something to be shared. There isn't much better feeling, I think, especially, in groups, men's groups or, things like that. Or I'm sure in AA as well, a lot of that happens as well. It must be something very special about the safety of being ready to experience something and let it leave your body, I guess, whether it's trembling or crying or laughter or whatever it may be, completing. They talk about it in a Body Keeps the Score type thing, and Pete Levine's work about completing an event that wasn't allowed to complete originally. That's a big part of trauma, this completion. Yeah. And it liberates us to connect to everything we talked about today, alignment and values. So yeah, beautifully done there, Garrett. It fits so nicely into what we've been talking about. And our last question of the day Everyone's done it since day one. This is episode 60 something, is a message of hope, Garrett. That's what we're looking for. So anything that you can share to our listeners, all our neurodivergent listeners, just a message of hope that it's going to be okay. We are good people. We can do this. Just a lovely wrap up.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to think about, and it's a challenge that when things stake, it's a challenge for me when stakes start to feel higher to remind myself of this. And so it's a challenge I pose to other people. If we choose to continue to believe the myth that success requires sacrifice, what's tomorrow look like? What's next week look like? What's next month look like? What's the rest of your life look like? Okay, and if instead we decide to choose and believe something differently, if we understand that success is actually built through your well-being, what does next week, next month look like? If we make that the primary focus, and then we go to work afterwards, and all the work we do is in service of that, how does it feel to be you?
I love that. That's perfect. That's perfect. I want to add anything to it. I want to leave it beautifully. But no, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. I've been really looking forward to it because we have touched a little bit on burnout here and there. So it's been so nice to just dedicate a good, solid bit of time there because it's such a big thing in our community. So I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think it's incredible. Like I said, your energy is fantastic. You must hold a really lovely space for your clients, which is wonderful. And where can we find you? Where's best to find you online? I'll put links in the show notes, but just verbally tell us where we can go.
Yeah, if people want to be professional, they can follow me on the professional social network, LinkedIn. Or if they want to be a little bit more personable, I'm on Instagram as well, and my website. So the easiest way to reach out. And please do, if something sparked interest, or please, I'd love to chat. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. No, I encourage people to do that. You are now part of the Ending Free community. So you've been on the show and now you're part of our little bubble. So there'll be lots of content coming out with you and me, I'm sure. And I'd love you back on sometime to talk about hypnotherapy as well. I'd love to find out more about how that all intertwines and what we talked about here today, and neurodivergence as well, if you'd be up for that.
Absolutely. That'd be a blast.
Yeah. Great stuff. Great. Keep an eye out for that, guys. So thank you, Garrett. Thank you, everybody, for listening at home. We really hope these podcast episodes help you. And thank you all to those who help grow this social movement that we have now become in 2026. So thank you for listening. And we will see you in the next episode for more ND Chat.